Welcome back to the County News Podcast. I'm Nicole Weissman.
And I'm Charlie Ban.
And in today's episode, we're talking about homelessness. This is aligned, Charlie, to a spotlight in this most recent issue of County News. What made your team decide this was something you wanted to take a special deep dive on?
Well, on one hand, homelessness is a serious human services issue. It's a quality of life issue for so many county residents. But it's not just about housing. It's about a coordination of various county functions. It's coordinating with the private sector as well as the county housing department. It's not just about homelessness.
It's complex. And I think that's something that's really going to come through in your interview with today's guest, Ed Nusser, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, Director of Housing Strategies. What kind of stood out to you in that conversation?
What stood out to me was that the 500 and 500 initiative, which is Allegheny County's program to create 500 units of housing in 500 days, isn't just about housing. It's about how Allegheny County reorganized itself after the inauguration of a new county executive, how it set new priorities, and how the county functions as a unit.
And later in the episode, you'll also have a conversation with Mike Matthews, NACo's Legislative Director for Community, Economic, and Workforce Development. Very excited to see kind of how he can expand that interview from Allegheny County, Pennsylvania to the full national landscape. So looking forward to that as well. And Charlie, I know as a final note, we're coming close to the end of the year and folks can expect a new editorial calendar for next year's slate of County News podcast episodes. So everyone can stay tuned and we'll have more about that in the coming weeks.
I can't wait to bring that to you.
Great. Let's get right into the interviews.
Allegheny County's 500 and 500 initiative aims to create 500 units of affordable housing in 500 days to help people move out of shelters. Ed Nusser recently joined Allegheny County as its first Director of Housing Strategy. Ed, who are you aiming this program to serve, and how does it fit into the county's organizational structure?
These are people who are holding down jobs, who are navigating a transit system that is not easy to navigate in the best of times sometimes, and understand, and these are individuals that, but for the cost of housing, could be stably housed. These are individuals who are largely economically homeless. And so really it's about creating access to affordable permanent housing to get, this population of first-time homeless folks out of shelter and back into stable housing. The County Housing Authority obviously owns and operates public housing. They develop tax credit housing as well. They run our voucher program for the county. And then our county has a redevelopment authority and economic development department that is the conduit for HUD dollars for CDBG and home money to invest in the creation of new affordable housing. The city of Pittsburgh has its own HUD allocations that go into affordable housing production in the city that flow through their redevelopment authority. They have their own housing authority. So really it's about bringing together the city redevelopment authority, the city housing authority, the county housing authority, the county economic development department, and connecting all of those resources to the individuals that Department of Human Services is supporting throughout the shelter system.
County Executive Sarah Innamorato brought a timely focus to the issue of housing when she took office in January. How is this initiative focusing county departments, and when did housing conditions change in Allegheny County to the point where cost is such a barrier?
Yeah, I think the county executive's leadership and the partnership that she brings with both the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh and, from her time in the State House, our state elected leaders, and our congressional delegation at the federal level, this is really a chance for the first time in a while in our region, I think, to really align all layers of government to work towards a clear problem statement and a clear solution that I think DHS defined really well. We are not presenting a panacea. We are not presenting a silver bullet, but we are talking about a key challenge in the ecosystem of unhoused and housing unstable individuals. And this is a clear problem and a clear sort of process towards addressing that specific problem. I've said 500 is less a development problem and more a government coordination problem. This is about making government work and tying together what were formerly, through no fault of anybody, largely kind of silos, and understanding no, your work ties into the work of this department, ties into the work of this authority, and having the county executive at the head saying, you all the expectation is that you all are going to work together and you all are going to speak to each other and work together on this one on a multitude of shared goals, this being the first one. We saw an initial sort of bump in a handful of markets, a handful of micro markets of neighborhoods, sort of coming out of the Great Recession in like 13, 14, 15. We started to see a handful of markets in the city that had never really seen market growth explode in market value. The example I use on that is the neighborhood of Lawrenceville in the city of Pittsburgh. The median house in 2000 sold for $25,000. Last year, the median house sold for $395,000. And it's like that's growth that the city of Pittsburgh never knew how to manage because we've been a declining region for a long time since the 60s. It's about managing decline. So that sort of started to happen 13, 14, 15. But really coming out of the pandemic is when things felt like they just got put on steroids in terms of market growth and just the increase in rents, the increase in home prices. And now you layer on top of that now the rise in interest rates, which is driving rents higher and driving home prices further out of reach for folks. We have to ensure we're setting individuals leaving shelter up for success. And that means that making sure the investments we're making as a county in new or renovated affordable housing is proximate to transit and proximate to jobs and our medical centers so that people have access to doctors that they need. And so I think all of those things sort of play into it.
I saw that the county's main shelter suffered a fire and became uninhabitable just days before this program was announced. I can only imagine that exacerbated stress on the county's resources for the unhoused.
I think, too, the fire did also help, and I think it still will help moving forward, to Abby's point, helping to personify, a population of folks that are so easily othered by so many people. Because, I know I have a friend who in grad school his apartment caught on fire and the Red Cross rehoused him because his apartment and neighbors next door all had fire and water damage, right? We have other people know people whose houses burned down or how the idea of a house or apartment catching on fire is not a foreign thing.
It is.
And so it is there's 1 or 2 degrees of separation, folks. Oh, right, yeah, Uncle Jim had that. It adds a level of personification. This could happen to anybody, right? Where we kind of like to lie to ourselves a lot and think about how secure we all really are.
What's the process look like for property acquisition?
I think it's, again, trying to align our public investment and our philanthropic community here in Pittsburgh around how can we bring these buildings online. And so the property that Director Dalton mentioned in Stanton Heights is a great example. It was a former nursing home. It closed. It could be pretty easily converted into single-room occupancy for as bridge or transitional housing. Really, this is not going to be a permanent SRO building, but this can be a place where folks can move to, get supports, get back on the job market, get back into stable employment, and from there move into self-sustaining housing. And then those beds open back up for another cycle of folks every 6 to 12 months, right? You're kind of moving sort of cohorts of individuals through that process. Really, it's a one more way to unkink the hose, right? The hose is kinked in a lot of directions. And so how do we create this flow that needs to happen? Because unfortunately, given, realities of the broader economic market, the housing market, we know that individuals are going to keep being confronted with housing instability or becoming unhoused. And so how do we have rapid responses in place so folks don't feel stuck at any one spot in the system? But a lot of those conversions, there's no secret sauce. It is what pencils and what makes sense. Another key part of 500 that we're able to leverage right now is the county's allocation of American Rescue Plan home dollars, right? So American Rescue Plan increased home allocations, and those home funds were specifically tied to serving unhoused or folks at risk of homelessness. And so one of the ways that we're supporting unit renovation, supporting those conversions, is by bringing home ARP dollars from county economic development into those projects to help close the gap and help make them pencil better. And then our local foundation community has also risen to the challenge, and some foundations have put money into capital projects like those conversions. Others have put money into funds to support sort of the people-based work of tenant supports when folks move into housing. But really it is kind of building the whole ecosystem of, public support, private philanthropic support, private investment, corporate partnerships that can help make everything sort of make the whole ship stay afloat.
How does this program work with landlords?
So really on sort of the small mom and pop landlords that are still a lot of them around Western Pennsylvania, really sort of where we're focusing our effort is on unlocking housing choice vouchers for individuals who are leaving shelter, so that those individuals, with the support of housing navigators at DHS, can go to the market and look for an apartment where they want to be and know they have that voucher in their back pocket to pay the rent. Because a lot of times, right, you may have, I've had a couple of voicemails this week of landlords like, I've got a couple empty apartments. If I can rent the people who need them, tell me how. And so, as Aaron mentioned, right, part of it is just being what they need. If you have an apartment, call us and we can help you fill that. But the big part of it is connecting those individuals who otherwise wouldn't know about it. Is like, this is how we can get you onto the waiting list for a housing choice voucher. This is how you can get the waiting list for public housing. Because, those are navigating that web of public support and where to go and who to call is something that most people can't handle on their best of days. And when you're faced with losing your apartment or moving out or moving into a shelter, you don't really have the emotional capacity to navigate through 4 different bureaucratic channels.
On top of managing your family.
And so really, on like the small scale landlords, the focus that might be on the small scale market. With the larger developers, what it has been is, the city and the county are providing gap financing into those projects that also have LIHTC allocations. So with this local support, we're asking you to work with PHFA and HUD to set aside a portion of those units, no more than 10%, to be available for individuals that are leaving shelter, and kind of give our Department of Human Services a first look to see, hey, if this unit's becoming available in 60 days, can you give us 2 weeks to fill it before you go to your waiting list? And there's, some real excitement there because our state HFA requires in every LIHTC building that 10% of the units be set aside for folks at or below 20% of area median income. And the many developers have told us those are the hardest ones that we have to fill, is getting someone who is that low of income that we can get in.
How about repairing units to the point where they can be safely occupied?
Using those home American Rescue Plan dollars. And our Department of Economic Development has run an RFP for looking for those moderate rehabs or those acquisitions of vacant buildings that aren't quite turnkey but are pretty close to turnkey. And so
95% of the way.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so they've committed to a couple of projects that are, I think, combined for around 50 to 60 units, I think, all in. And they've committed some American Rescue Plan dollars to that. They're continuing to sort through the RFP responses to look at, okay, what's really turnkey, what's really shovel-ready, and what is developer speak for shovel-ready, because we all know the two can be different.
Just going to see.
Yeah, exactly. But there is still about a pool of $6 million of home American Rescue Plan dollars the county intends to deploy in the coming months into projects just like that to bring new units online. Some of it is going to go to support housing authority units that are vacant and in need of moderate renovation. Some of it's going to be working with acquisition targets that our nonprofit communities identified and said, hey, this building's half empty, but we've been through it. It doesn't need a lot of work.
Yeah.
We can take those vacancies and move folks from shelter into those vacancies. And then other, also supporting private developers that, have affordable units that are under HUD contract or through LIHTC that are, maybe nearing the end of that 15, 25-year compliance. And so they need some recapitalization money, but that's still going to be significantly cheaper on a per unit basis and much faster than trying to invest in brand new construction.
You're filling a new position as the Director of Housing Strategies. What perspective and experience do you bring to the county?
I spent the first 15 years of my career working in community development, nonprofit real estate development, affordable housing work. And in those 15 years, I saw the things that prevented my organization and my partners from what we would say is letting us actually match the scale of the problem with an appropriately scaled solution. And a lot of those things were just, there are a majority of well-meaning elected officials and well-meaning public servants who hadn't actually done had never actually done like the sort of other side of like actually putting deals together and knowing what it takes to actually create housing developments. And I thought I had a unique lens of like, hey, this is a new job. I think like we're going to need to answer the production question. We're going to need to answer the financing question. And I ran my head into those walls for 15 years. I know where those walls are. Mm-hmm. So I was really excited to help break some of those down. So it was a really exciting fit for me. Obviously, the county executive ran for office with housing as a cornerstone of her campaign and wanted to clearly make it a key part of her administration. Mm-hmm. So it was, also for me, I've joked I'm a first-time public servant in the office. But coming into government and coming into work for an elected official who clearly has her heart and her mind on housing, I was like, this is going to be a great place to work. And it has been, and it's been amazing. I think 500 is the first step in really beginning to address both how do we expedite production of housing that is affordable, and how do we create ways to leverage the incredibly limited resources that we have at the local, state, and federal level to make those dollars go further. I think is a great example of bringing, stacking housing choice vouchers on top of private landlords that are, the quote unquote naturally affordable product that we always talk about, but matching that with vouchers to get deeper affordability. Corporate partners to the table as part of a downtown investment strategy. Like, these are all the layers that we have to put into the 18-layer layer cake to make affordable housing work. So it's really exciting.
So now we're joined by Mike Matthews. He's NACo's Legislative Director for Community, Economic, and Workforce Development. Mike, you could say that creating and shepherding affordable workforce housing is like nailing jello to the wall, but how can counties expect to try to do that?
Thanks for having me, Charlie. I think you put it a very, very nice way. I think taking a step back and kind of just talking about and having a better understanding of, the financial structuring of these projects and what kind of goes into these projects is really helpful for county elected officials to better understand the nuances that go into the projects to help create more unique and intentional solutions to solve the project. So just a quick little overview of that before really getting started, Charlie, if that's okay. But developing new housing is a really complicated process that requires years of planning and resources really before the first shovel ever hits the ground. These costs and complexities have become even greater in recent years. Changing macroeconomic conditions, including inflation and rising interest rates, really affect the availability and cost of capital. And in addition to that, have pushed up labor and material costs. Workforce and supply shortages, have really further exacerbated the already high price of construction. Intertwined with economic uncertainty has really made typical financing partners, such as lenders and equity partners, really apprehensive about supporting new housing development. Given these additional layers of uncertainty and the ongoing housing supply shortage, it's really more important than ever for policymakers and housing advocates to really understand the math behind the developer's use to decide whether they can start a project to build more homes. So, really without having that baseline understanding of these financial concepts, policymakers may create, regulations that undermine housing production goals, even if those laws or policies are really well-intentioned. And on the flip side, having a more nuanced understanding of the financial structure of these deals can also help you as a policymaker create more creative and impactful solutions, allowing your community to increase that affordable supply quicker.
And frankly, it's really hard to imagine what 2028 is going to look like when you set these policies and put plans in place.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really important, to do the education up front on how these plans are structured and things like that, but also, have a better understanding of the role that you as a county official can play in making these projects more affordable and making them really pencil out, right? Whether it's changes to land use and zoning regulations, how we build, all will help close that gap. I think the bottom line right now, given, the macroeconomic headwinds and a lot of the associated expensive costs that come with construction, kind of taking a step back, there's three real main costs. The hard costs. So these are all the costs associated with the physical construction of the project. So they generally comprise up to 2/3 of the overall development project budget. And these include everything from the physical structure of the building, like concrete and drywall, to the appliances and major systems like HVAC. It also includes labor and also, some contingency planning is typically required by financial partners to guard against cost overruns. So it's typically a 5 to 10% additional contingency plan on top of, the hard cost worked out materials. Then there's soft costs. So, any fees required with as the condition of approval for the project, like school fees, utility connection fees, transportation fees, really those impact fees that counties can levy. Also consultants for like pre-development, economic impact studies, and then also the financing costs. So, the cost of interest on loans. And then, one of the most recent cost prohibitive pieces of construction has really been land costs. So, saying all that to say, subsidies, although come in many different forms, have really become a critical component of making, these affordable housing projects pencil out.
The way you outline the various costs you can't get away from, it really draws a parallel to me that just how county governments have to work, that so much of what they do is mandated by state governments. There's really not that much wiggle room for counties to decide this is what we want to do on top of providing mandated services and resources.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to, affordable housing or housing development in general, right? Is it really is a complex issue that requires not only strong partnerships and dialogue, but coordination, right? I mean, there's 5 or 6 different layers of, quote unquote players in the housing development space, right? You have, at the global and national level. So you have housing material supply chains, housing investments and programs, monetary policy and interest rates, federal tax policy. And then, like you mentioned, Charlie, you have state governments that also have tax policies and incentives, building codes and local housing law preemption, which, we're seeing a lot more recently over the past few statewide legislative sessions. We're seeing more preemption laws being put into place, and some of the land use and zoning framework comes from the state level. And then we have some sub-state, regional, and local governments, which includes counties. But in addition to those, we have the private markets. So, they're your investors and banks and the housing developers themselves, financial institutions, and the workforce. But then you also have the community members and public interests. So community land trusts, nonprofits, and other community-based organizations all really playing their own unique roles within, this larger ecosystem.
Is there anything else you want to make sure we get in?
I think just really doing that education up front of like how these developments are structured can really go a long way. But in addition to that, also understanding the role within your county's governance structure can play the solution, right? Localities really take an active role in shaping affordable housing initiatives and really do have a strong impact on promoting housing stability, achieving equitable development patterns, and building coalitions with that to really foster broader change, right? Like I mentioned earlier, decisions over land use, so what types of housing can be built in which locations, are largely made at the state and local level, right? So these development processes are often seen, unfortunately, often seen as long, complicated, and potentially risky, all factors that can drive up the cost of newly built housing. So I think, local governments really need to, focus on some of the following issues when it comes to fostering a good environment for the development of affordable housing. So one, establishing a balanced, equity-driven housing strategy, using national and local data to deepen an understanding of housing in the community, analyzing development feasibility, like I mentioned earlier, to ensure practical housing policies make sense for the local market, developing sound underwriting principles for the use of public funds to maximize the success for individual projects, taking stock of your regulatory agenda. A lot of times land use and zoning is largely out of date. So making sure that meets the current demand of your community, and then understanding, the market trends and realities, construction and labor costs, and really prioritizing development by establishing and tracking clear goals and objectives.
Thank you for listening to NACo's County News podcast. If you have any feedback for our team, we look forward to hearing from you. Otherwise, we'll be back to you soon. And in the meanwhile, check out lots of resources on NACo.org and follow us on social media.